hit record there, and then we're going to dive in, and just like you said.
Awesome. Awesome.
So let me welcome you to BALLZ in Your Face Marketing.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, this is Kasey Jones. She is a genius growth marketing strategist. She's the founder of revdev.io.
Yeah.
And let me quickly set the stage here about what prompted this meeting here. Was that, well, let me go back a few steps. So several weeks back, we did an episode and we were talking about what makes a great marketer. And amongst other things, one of the answers that had come out was empathy. And sure enough, a week ago or so, I came across a little video that you had done specifically on the subject. I immediately felt this sort of kindred spirit with you. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so passionate. I love this subject. I never get to talk about it. I got to talk to Kasey Jones about empathy.
Awesome.
Yeah, so let's dive right in. And I have why don't you take a step back and you maybe tell us a bit about what your thoughts were behind that video. I'll put a link to it below when I post this, but tell us a little bit about what the Coles Notes version.
Yeah, so I think that what I find very frequently, especially for early stage marketers or founders of early stage companies that are often kind of the de facto marketers or the de facto marketing strategists, is they really focus on tactics and on like growth hacks and experiments and these other things, and they're kind of missing the forest for the trees. And in my view, when, it is all about empathy. It is all, no matter what your role in business is, empathy is super, super valuable and super helpful. Right. And one of the things that was interesting in the response to this video that I made is, and I have a follow-up coming up soon, is that a lot of times when people hear the word empathy, they only think about interpersonal relationships. And that's a huge part. I'm not discrediting that at all. But in my view as a marketer, I think of empathy almost, and forgive me for using this term, but it's empathy at scale. Okay. And so what I think about is all of the ways that you can better understand your buyer, your customer, your target market, so that you understand what motivates them and so that you can better explain the value that you can provide for them.
Okay. So that somewhat leads me to a question that I have, which is this. Because for sure, I agree with you that there's lots of skills that people can learn to understand their audience better. Yeah. So for example, I don't know if you've ever sort of studied, like, let's say, like a personality grid where, based on sort of extrovert, introvert.
Yeah.
So, right, people fall into different grids, and based on that, you can then therefore have a better understanding of how best to speak to that audience. But sometimes I wonder, is empathy maybe perhaps also more like a sense of perception, like eyesight, where some people have better vision than others? Is it really something that you can learn?
So that's also a really interesting thing. And like, look, I think there are components to empathy that are tougher to learn. Some of us are better at being kind of intuitive and feeling sort of how somebody else feels or having that kind of sense. But I do think that some of these sort of information gathering strategies and methods can really help you approximate that, and it can get you much, much closer. So, a lot of the clients that I work with are technical founders. So developers turned CEOs. And one of the workshops that I often do with them is it's a brand story workshop, right? Where we talk about how the hero of their story, of their brand story, is their customer. And so that we can really sort of put ourselves in that customer sort of mindset in their shoes of what are the problems that they're facing, what are the struggles that they're dealing with, and how can you as a product or as a CEO, as a marketer, whatever, how can you kind of be their Obi-Wan be their guide in helping them achieve wonderful things. And so that is more than like, you know, that storytelling aspect and positioning the customer in that way, then is more than just this sort of nuts and bolts, I'm learning information so that I can speak to them in this particular way. It's more about thinking about this, how you help them achieve their dreams and their goals, and this story around it. And so I think there's a lot of different frameworks and methodologies that you can use that get you past that point of just sort of the nuts and bolts, just the metrics, and the more sort of personal and maybe more emotional ways of understanding who your buyer is and what's really going to resonate with them.
Yeah, no, I mean, all of that, I think resonates a lot with me. I mean, I agree that first of all, exactly, that this is where a lot of businesses have been moving towards that sort of agile methodology, which is, I think, precisely what you're talking about. You know, it's maybe a big buzzword, but at the end of the day, it's, to me, that is a customer-centric approach to marketing, which, you know, people weren't able to do. A traditional marketing was throwing shit on a wall kind of a thing, and you hope that, you know, somebody, you know, the right people kind of find it. Whereas now, exactly what you're saying is that the new technologies allow us to, as the sort of phrase that we've often used, is sort of find your tribe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that phrase, right? And one of the things I think about, and look, like I come from a unique perspective where I focus very much on B2B. And one of the reasons why I love B2B is you actually have a better feedback loop of how you learn from your customers, right? Like, to me, B2C marketing seems totally terrifying because it seems like they're very much still in that throwing shit at the wall and just seeing what sticks. Whereas B2B, you don't close deals usually unless you are talking to customers. And once somebody does buy your product, right, you also have a much more direct process of onboarding them and getting them successful and all of these things. So your ability to really, really deeply learn about your customers and like what motivates them and why they buy from you and why they give a shit about your product, right? Like, you have way more access in this way that is really exciting and really cool. And I love that you brought up the sort of agile methodology, because this is actually sort of how I explain my approach to these technical founders that I kind of mentioned, is that they're all really familiar with this customer-centric, buyer-centric product development process. And my pitch really is, let's apply that same methodology to marketing and to sales, where it's like, let's make some initial hypotheses about what's going to work, and then let's work into our strategy ways to test and learn and iterate and improve.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree exactly. And we've spoken a bit about this, how exactly that people buy from people who they know, like, and trust. And so that, you know, building a rapport is important, you know, with your audience. You can't just come in. This is what I was saying to one of our peers the other day is, you know, how often has anybody gotten on a phone call? What's the price? What's the service? Okay, sold. Okay,
done. No. And especially now, because the market's so crowded, I don't care what your product is. And I guarantee, like, there's a ton of folks out there listening or not listening who are like, oh, no, my product is completely unique. I have no real competitors. Sorry, not the case. And every space is really crowded and you have a ton of competition. And so the thing that makes the difference is this kind of personal rapport and this personal connection. And it's one thing that is astounding to me in working with technical founders often is, I would say the most common roadblock in terms of their growth is, I'm not exaggerating, they genuinely have this sense that if I build it, they will come. I've built this awesome product. It's amazing. It should sell itself. I shouldn't actually have to do anything. And all I have to put on my website is like all of the really cool features, and it's going to be a done deal, no problem. And then they start down that path and they hit a wall real freaking fast, and it is a rude awakening, or at least you hope it's a rude awakening. Sometimes it's not an awakening.
They realize that nobody knows they exist.
Yeah.
They haven't gotten out there, right?
Yeah.
I agree. So let me try and sort of step this back, because I actually think that this subject, I really think this is big. Like, this is a big, very important thing, especially today, in today's day and age. So here's my take on it, and people can certainly contradict this definition of culture. But one definition that I have of culture is that it is the socially acceptable neuroses of the time. Okay, looks like you're processing.
Okay. Yeah, I know. There's a lot to unpack in those few words, and I like this, but I want to hear more about. What you're thinking there.
Okay, so more specifically, what I would define our current day and age culture, based on that definition, is narcissism. Which is
fuck yeah.
Right. Okay, there you go. Yeah. So which is defined in many respects by a lack of empathy. Yeah. Right?
Without a doubt.
Yeah. So this is something that I think is just so important, not just for business, but just in life in general. I just feel like the world needs more empathy.
Oh, without a doubt.
You know.
And part of it also is empathy kind of with yourself. Because one of the things that fuels narcissism is this belief that, like, you have to have this carefully constructed presentation of self, and that that's the only way anyone's going to really like you. And so narcissists get in, they start going down this path of really starting to buy their own bullshit, of, creating this sort of persona, and then consistently finding ways to promote that and push that out to the public. And then they become very afraid of just really being genuine and being vulnerable and being honest and authentic. And I do think that we are starting to see this, this pendulum swing in the other direction.
I hope so, and I think you're right. I mean, what you're saying is I think very true for me. That I think probably doing exactly what you were saying is sort of, okay, this is how an agency presents itself, and all of a sudden I kind of tapped in and realized, well, wait a minute, there are these people that I'm seeing being very successful by being authentic, and there's a sort of new economy of authenticity that I'm absolutely loving, because. Because, like I said, this is, for me, this is the thing, is empathy is of all the sort of tools and skills that I've developed over the years as a marketer, I would say that empathy is the one that I feel like I was born with. If anything, in fact, I'd say that it was like, that I've always felt in a way almost hyper empathetic. So, for example, like, I prefer a one-on-one conversation like this versus crowds, because for me, there is, most of communication is in fact nonverbal, and in a big crowd, I'm not only just paying attention to the conversation that's going, but I'm kind of picking up on all these other, like, this person didn't like what that person said, this person feels like they can't get a word in edgewise, and it's all just noise to me in a way. It's so much. I remember, actually, this was one thing when I was like about 6 years old. My grandparents lived out in this small rural farm out in Cornwall, Ontario, surrounded pretty much almost 180 degrees or 160 degrees by forest, and stray cats would come onto the property, and sometimes they would end up adopting them. So one day, one of the cats was pregnant and had gone off into the forest and had its babies, and me being 6-year-old, I was like, I want to find the babies. And of course, everybody in my family was like, no, you're not, you'll never find these in a forest. Don't worry, they're fine. And so I ended up sort of walking around. The cat was following me. So I started to walk around the house a couple times. And every single time that I would stop at a certain point, the cat would stop and look off in one direction. And so it was through that, and so I did it a couple times, and it just kept on happening. So I said to everybody, they're there, they're out there. And sure enough, we went into the forest and we found them.
And I'm sure when you said that, all the adults were like, "Oh, okay, kiddo," like, and I roll and like, "Yeah, we'll appease you and sort of entertain you," and then you find the cats, and they're like, "Oh, whoa,
oh, holy shit." Holy
Yeah.
shit, this kid's the
This
cat
kid is
whisperer.
pretty perceptive.
Yeah, so yeah, like, I mean, I really, you know, it's a big subject to me because exactly, I mean, it's the means of communication. Like, really, for me, communication is that's life in a way, right?
Without
Like,
a doubt.
you look at all species in life, there's communication going on all the time, and yeah, I really think a lot of issues and problems today are due to this lack of, and I hope you're right about this sort of pendulum shift.
So here's what I keep thinking about. So over kind of recent years, with the rise of social media, you know, and we've read lots of articles about this, and I've certainly experienced this, like, personally. There's a lot of aspects of social media that have made us feel more alone, more isolated. You scroll through Facebook or Instagram, and it's all of these, like I was saying, these like carefully curated presentations of self, and they all seem like bullshit. And for years, and for a while, actually, they didn't seem like bullshit. It just seemed like everybody's life was way better than mine was. And you get in this sort of this hamster wheel of trying to keep up with that. And it's, I definitely fell victim to that for years in my personal life. And I think a lot of us did. And as a result, there's a lot of people that sort of, you know, left Facebook or, you know, decided to delete that app off their phone and those kinds of things because it just doesn't feel good. And there's tons of research that shows that for women, especially, like 5 minutes on Instagram is as bad as reading really terrible fashion magazines, you know? And it's they make us feel alone and like there's something wrong with our lives. And one of the things that I think is really fascinating about what's going on, particularly with the use of video, is the videos that are performing the best, and especially like on LinkedIn and a little bit on Facebook, but especially on LinkedIn and in the professional community, are ones that are not polished.
Right.
They're ones where somebody is saying, they're not always looking at the camera, where it's clear that it's off the cuff. They're kind of just being their genuine selves. And what is kind of amazing to me is and I'm experiencing this because I'm just starting to kind of test the use of LinkedIn video, which is obviously how you and I got connected. And what's really astounding to me is that the reactions from people are that they feel like we have a personal connection we've never met. And all of a sudden, we're starting to see this increase in people just being really, really genuine and really honest, and in this way that is so refreshing.
It is.
And what's astounding, so after I had my first couple of videos do well on LinkedIn, people that I know, and not really very well, but that I know sort of here in Portland where I live, and I'd see them at a meetup or I'd see them kind of in public, and they'd come up to me and I'd get this like huge hug from people that I barely know, like this huge like bear hug. And we're like, they're hugging me for like 20 seconds. And I'm like, this is awesome, but this is weird. And their reaction always is not, they don't talk about even what I said. What they all have said first is, oh my God, you just seem so real. And I am so moved by the fact that it's just you. And that, like, those are the videos that I've done that like seem to resonate the most, but that is also the stuff that gets people the most excited. And that is so refreshing, because I feel like just a couple of years ago, the real stuff made people a little queasy and uncomfortable. And the only real stuff you saw on social media was like people kind of whining, right? It was either people being really, really perfect, or people kind of being whiners. And there was like nothing in between. And I think like, you know, Brene Brown and her whole TED Talk on vulnerability years ago, that was like, this was like the tip of the spear. And people are starting to recognize that like, we're just kind of fed up with this, I don't know, this superficial presentation of self. And to kind of get back to this like empathy and marketing concept, the thing that I think about is, I agree with you. Yes, a lot of us are sort of born with a sense of empathy, and I would certainly put myself in that category. But now I am learning ways as a marketer where I can kind of apply that empathy at scale. I don't necessarily, like, I can use certain strategies and tactics to gather information about my audience and about buyers that help me approximate that sort of knowledge and that insight that I would only get from lots and lots of one-on-one.
Okay, so I want to get into maybe some of those specific tips, but what I do want to actually, because what you said I think is bang on about this sort of presentation of happiness, and exactly, I think that created this sense of depression, because life isn't, no one's really always happy, right? Like, life is hard, and so, right, so I think exactly that. I think people get that false impression from others. That's what led to it. And then I think the other mistake that people also make, I think, is that we've almost, maybe this is almost marketers' fault, actually, right? Is that we've treated for a long time happiness as a destination. Yeah. Right. As if it's like some landing place, and it's that
job, make that, like, reach that 6-figure income, 7-figure income, reach some sort of milestone, and then you're done.
Yeah, that's right. It's like exactly. All you need to do is like get that, get your little plate of like lasagna and in front of a Lamborghini smiling, and then you're there.
lose those 5 pounds, buy that expensive outfit, like whatever it is, you're constantly being sold this kind of lie that if you just reach that next hurdle, that it's all done and you'll be fine.
And you'll be happy. Yeah, no. And I think this is where I think it ties in, is the fact that actually this new sort of freedom, this new being authentic is actually, I think, in a way helping sort of people realize, find that happiness. For me, happiness is that thing that you're passionate about. When you do it, you're in flow. Yeah. Right? When time passes and you don't even notice it, and you're not really sitting there in that moment with a big giant smile on your face the whole time. But to me, that is actual happiness.
And I'm not going to quote this right, but I will sort of encourage anybody listening, and it's going to make me look it up after this. Danielle Laporte has this great like breakdown of the difference between happiness and joy. And again, I'm not going to quote this right, so bear with me, but she says something like happiness is like a reaction to something, where joy is really like the state of being.
Right.
And I think that you can be going through some hard shit and challenge and kind of digging into the tough part of life and still be joyful. You might not be happy in the moment. You might not be full of smiles, but you might still be experiencing that, like, that deep internal reward and joy and sort of gratitude and appreciation for life. And that's really the important part, right? Like, we can all flash that sort of fake smile for the camera and be happy, but are you crafting a life that actually makes you feel joy?
Mm-hmm. 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 So let's get into some details, to the extent, obviously, I don't want you to reveal any insider secrets.
Divulge my secrets. Always happy to divulge my secrets.
So talk about some real practical strategies, tools, tips that people could use.
Okay, so one of the things that I do a lot, and so just to give you a little bit of context into the type of marketer that I am, I've already sort of shared that I focus on B2B. I'm typically in the early stage, but I actually come from a sales background and then made the transition to marketing. So that means I'm really, really biased in terms of, like, I do stuff that fills pipeline. If you want sort of a marketer that's really focused on aesthetics and images and branding and that, and like, I do some of that, but my focus is very much on just what gives your sales team at bats, what drives revenue specifically. And so that means what I do with like lead gen is I will often, if it's a if it's some sort of campaign, if it's some sort of like lead gen campaign, I will often include an extra question or two in a lead form. So yeah, we've always been told like you want to keep those questions as short as possible so that more people will fill it out. But when it's something like a content piece that people really are incentivized to kind of download, or maybe you're hosting a webinar, I will always add a couple of questions. So you got your name, your email, maybe it's a company name, but I'll also say like, hey, what's your number one goal associated with this topic? Or what's your chief challenge associated with this topic? And that serves a bunch of purposes. One, if it is, and I'll also, because I'm a salesperson, I've got a soft spot for salespeople. I will always run campaigns in conjunction with the sales team. So I will often, like, when I do webinars, I don't send out invitations only to the existing lead list. I'll get my sales development team involved, and we'll do outbound invitations to cold leads that have never heard from us before, inviting them to attend the webinar. And so all of a sudden, this means like you've gathered a ton of research into your target buyer because they've told you exactly what they're struggling with, right? Or what they care about, what their goals are. So one, that's super, super helpful for you to understand kind of what's motivating them. It's super helpful for you to craft your next couple of content pieces, right? If it is a webinar, you know exactly what questions to ask your panelists or whatever. But it really helps your sales team then communicate with that prospect in a more empathetic way, because they can follow up to that lead gen form and say, hey, you let us know that your biggest challenge right now is X. We'd love to be able to explain exactly how we can help you solve that problem. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes this much more like direct and personal kind of conversation, and one that is way more value-based than this sort of spray and pray model of like just kind of guessing what they might care about. And when you do this consistently over time, you'll learn more and more about what this audience cares about. And I will also say, if it's an early stage company or product, this is also incredibly helpful for your product team, because then they're like, oh, whoa, everybody's kind of talking about this one feature that is on our roadmap, but we haven't built yet. Maybe we should start to prioritize that or dig deeper into that. And so it can help give you insight into where to dig deeper in terms of what's driving or what is the motivation for your target audience.
Yeah, no, you're bang on. I think what we're sort of talking about, and this is very important, I think, when it comes to sales, right? Yeah. Is uncovering pain points.
Yeah.
And you know, Stan Way, who's one of our, he's a sales coach too, and I've learned a lot from him on this issue. You know, he's absolutely brilliant, and he says sort of the magic words in a first call when you're getting to know someone is tell me more.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Oh yeah.
Right, because you dig down, and what I've found, and he's found, and I know a lot of people do, is that first you'll get sort of a surface answer of, you know, it's some financial reason, or, you know, a human resources issue and so on. But if you dig down deeper, you find out that the real sort of pain point, or the real thing, it's something completely different. It's more like, I want, what, you know, you realize that what it is that they want more time with their family.
Yes, it's always a personal thing. And that's the tough part. I think a lot of marketers, and especially like a lot of like founders that are the de facto marketing strategists at their company, because it's early stage, they all think that what is driving purchases is whatever benefit that the company is going to experience. And it's like, no, a company doesn't buy your product, a person does. So you've got to think about what is motivating that individual person, not just their company.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, I think what you were touching on a bit before too is, you know, it's great again for all of these tools that just drive the sales, but there's other ways to use it to connect in a much deeper way. Like, you know, especially for example with chatbots and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
They're not just, I don't encourage people to use those really for just driving sales. I think it's an affinity building tool. And what seems to be very effective is, based on the response, you sort of throw up an emotional a GIF or something like that, and then because that conveys an emotion, and it's that emotional connection which seems to be very effective.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And, that's the other thing that is sort of interesting about the rise of social media, is because we follow, we follow like brands that we like on Instagram. And that means that we kind of have a more personal connection with brands. And so brands really do need to think about, like, what is our personality? And what is the kind of personality that we want to convey? And one of the things that's tough, I think, for a lot of founders and folks kind of not on the marketing side, is they will always err on being very sort of formal and a little bit stiff and a little bit serious. And what winds up happening is, like, you have no personality. Mm-hmm. And you just get kind of lost in the shuffle. And so I think a lot about, there's a Maya Angelou quote that I love, that I think about for me personally, but I also think about it in terms of brands, is, she says, like, again, paraphrasing, people aren't going to remember what you did. They're not going to remember what you said. What they're going to remember is how you made them feel. Yeah. And it's the same thing when it comes to, working with a product or a company. And that means that, like, when you're onboarding your sales team or your marketers, you've got to convey that story of the role that they're playing in your customers' lives, and that experience that you want your customers and your prospective customers to have, so that everyone can start to play that role and start to connect kind of in that vein, and in that sort of with that sort of personality or outcome or emotion in mind.
Mm-hmm. And that's probably why I guess you prefer working with the small businesses, as I kind of do too, because they're capable of creating that. A big, massive company, it's a little hard to say what it's, or how to convey a culture. And I think maybe that's what that would be, I guess, maybe what the bigger businesses should do is maybe start to involve more of their employees, especially those who seem to sort of embody the culture. And then push those people out and let what I mean, like in terms of like exposing the company, let them represent you, because otherwise, I think the smaller guys are starting to have an advantage, and I think we're starting to see that, right? We saw the rise in prominence of the Walmarts and Toys R Us, and what happened to Toys R Us, right?
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree with you, and I think this is also a reason why I'm super passionate about company culture. So I very much view, particularly at these smaller companies, you often don't have an HR person, or if you do have an HR person, they're running payroll and benefits and kind of doing the nuts and bolts in the day-to-day. I very much view marketers as the culture carriers of an early brand or a small brand, because brand and culture are the same freaking thing. If you're trying to present a brand identity and that does not match what your internal culture looks like, dude, it's not going to work. It's just not. Like, these two have to be very, very closely aligned. And so I very much believe that marketers need to have a really strong stake in this sort of internal culture. And I think that, like I was saying, sort of I love this like brand story concept. One of the things that I love about it is not just, it gives you a framework of how you talk to customers about the value that you can provide for them, but it's also how you onboard new employees, right? It's how you integrate them into your internal culture. And because let me tell you, your first day at a new job, way more exciting and motivating having someone tell you this story and your role in this narrative of how you help people achieve amazing things versus, I don't know, a packet of like policies and rules. And so if you can kick off an employee's like first experience or first day with this focus on how they are, like the role they are going to play in helping your customers, that is I think a much more compelling and exciting introduction to a new job than, I don't know, the standard, like, let's fill out a bunch of forms and let's talk about a lot of processes. And don't get me wrong, I'm a total process nerd. That is a very important part. But I think we don't want to forget, the point of why we're all showing up at work every single day.
Yeah. No, you're bang on. You're bang on. That's amazing. Thank you so much for taking this time and talking to me about this subject. Any other sort of like little takeaways that you think our audience could benefit from?
So I think what I would recommend to everybody listening is that there's a lot of incredible books that have come out in the last few years that help you learn more and more methods of using empathy. And so the series of videos that I'm doing right now, I'm going to talk about these, but I'll just mention a couple right now that I highly recommend. I think Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, which is all about negotiation. He's an FBI hostage negotiator that then went into like business negotiations, and his whole thing is about learning how to empathize with your sort of adversary. And I also really loved the book Insight by Tasha Eurich. And it's all about self-awareness. And so she starts with how to kind of be more self-aware about your behavior and how you're coming across to other people. And then it goes to how you can identify sort of someone else's motivation and behaviors and also sort of nudge them along in a better direction. And then how do you apply that in kind of a group setting? And so I recommend, like, look at some of the resources that are coming out that are talking about this, because even if it's not directly related to marketing, you'll pick up some lessons and some insight that I think will be very inspiring and motivating and like point you kind of in a better direction.
Yeah. No, I think you're bang on. And exactly what you were kind of saying earlier too is people need to sort of reevaluate how their businesses. I think we're so used to that sort of siloed approach to businesses, and I think now exactly we're starting to see the sort of interconnectivity of everything, and it again comes back to the people. Right?
Oh yeah, and you learn about your customers a lot faster and a lot more effectively if you've got sales, marketing, customer success, and product constantly sharing their insights and their lessons, because you're all getting different like little snippets of what's going on for your buyer, your customer. And if you're actually creating a knowledge sharing dynamic, you'll all learn from one another. You'll all have a better time doing it, right? It's more fun to collaborate anyway, and you'll grow a lot faster.
Yeah, no, I agree. So one of the things you had mentioned in that video that connected us was one of the sort of a frustration for you was how when that feeling of when you were misunderstood, and more specifically because there's a bit of an emphasis. You are passionate about the sort of women to women marketing field, and then of course then that people end up saying, well, it feels exclusionary to men. Look, everybody, she's on a show called Balls in Your Face Marketing. Okay, she's like, there you see. So there you go. So hopefully we've helped like dispel that here and now, and saying and probably this is sort of mutually serving in a sense, right? Like we haven't taken any slack yet. Although one of these days,
I'm sure you're going to.
Your name's a little misogynistic. So hopefully this will serve us both well on that front. Kasey,
happy to help.
Thank you so much, because again, this is a subject that I love. I'm passionate about. It's great to find somebody like yourself who's given it this kind of thought and found ways to sort of use that and implement that in your life and in your business. I think it's amazing. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It was great. It was a really, really fun conversation. So
Awesome.
hopefully I will get to see sort of more of what you are putting out, and I'm excited to kind of continue the conversation and keep learning from you.
Likewise, I'd love to have you back.
Awesome.
I've got big balls. I've got